Okay, what happened to JavaScript? The original idea of JavaScript was it's supposed to be something to run in your browser. It's kind of transited beyond that. That's a common thing that happened. The Microsoft equivalent of that, VB script, was originally supposed to be the competitor to JavaScript, but it turned out it integrated so nicely into Windows that us server guys used it to do our heavy lifting for us, like go out and check how much drive space you got left and all that good stuff. Okay, JavaScript is everywhere. What is an IoT device?
Internet of Things.
Internet of Things, what is that?
It's like a smart toaster, smart fridge.
I love your example, smart toaster.
Smart anything.
Who would have thunk it that you're supposed to get your toasters are now smart? There's a lot of things you don't have to think about that we used to worry with. It used to be very common to lock your keys in your car. I think you have to work a little bit at it now, right? Because most of the time you just press the button on your keys and you lock your car. I have to be careful, I've got regular locks. These days, if you get out and you forget to turn off your lights, the car either does it for you or it yells at you, right? Now, when I was there, if you you could walk off in broad daylight, and if you didn't realize your lights were on, you had a disappointing experience when you got back. Okay, Node is not really a web application framework, but an asynchronous event-driven JavaScript runtime designed for building scalable network applications. Notice that scalable. What does scalable mean? Any guesses? Not really looking for a dictionary, just what does that mean to you? And why is that important in programming? Have you heard the term before?
Yeah, it means like as like a web server, it can handle lots of requests. Like you can do more instances and be able to handle more.
Okay, Ken, I got the chat window open again. Yeah, that's the idea of Victoria. You've got the idea. Scalable, and I've seen, here's an example that we had from work that was not scalable. Have I talked about net meeting before? Okay, so I either haven't talked about it or you forgot about it. Either way, that's okay. I'll tell you again. Everybody's used Skype, right? Net meeting was Microsoft's version 1.0. That does you two things, right? Do you want to use Microsoft's version 1.0 of anything? Okay, you don't want to use version 1.0 of anything, particularly Microsoft. So what happened was net meeting. If you had net meeting, you can hook two computers together and you can talk back and forth on them, like you do with Skype. Problem was, it wasn't scalable. So what happened, you had a couple of our engineers up at the head shed that they would sit there and they were able to talk across their cubicles, and they said, well, we're just going to get rid of these $70,000, $80,000 conference rooms. We're just all going to use net meeting. So they sent us some fancy telephones, and they sat there and kept on aggravating us to set them up, and we told them they didn't work. They said they work just fine here, they'll work down there. I told them about it, and I got a lecture on the speed of light. They said, well, the speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. Yeah, that's nice. That has nothing to do with it. By the way, 2.9978 meters per second, 10 to the 8th meters per second. But so what happened was they had the big meeting where they had the CEO in there, and all of a sudden it sounded like Pink Floyd. Why? It wasn't scalable. It worked okay across the room, but across from here up to Pennsylvania and back with a bunch of people on it, it sounded like a Pink Floyd concert. That person would suddenly be reassigned, and about 2 months later, somebody else would have the same idea. That's an example of not scalable. That for another example of not scalable, and this is my pet peeve as a DBA, is people build a nice little data access database to do something. That's nice. As long as you're doing it for yourself, for your office, that's fine. Don't try to run the enterprise on it. Okay. Get off my soapbox. Okay, software to make up Node.JS. You got about 2 or 3 layers there. As you can see, it's not only multi-layer. You also have add-ons to it, like you can with a lot of others. Okay, when I talk about concurrency, and what happens there, multi-thread is an example of concurrency. And we have examples of that. Have any of you had to do a multi-thread program? If you do, schedule yourself some time. It's going to take a while. One of the problems with the multi-thread program is making sure everything keeps in sync if something doesn't happen. Example of concurrency. If you tried it back in the early 2000s, if you tried to install Oracle on Windows from a network drive, it would fail. And it would fail because there was just enough latency with opening up the files and all that. It would sit there and it would spawn several processes at once, and it didn't check to see if they were keeping pace with each other. So what would happen? It would come to the point where it says, "I'm going to copy this file." Well, that file hadn't been unzipped yet. It'll crash on you. It took me about a week to figure out that was what was happening. So concurrency is important. Multi-threading is one concurrency model. It says it's accessible to race condition deadlock. What would deadlocking be? Okay, remember what I just said about during installation, you have one thread that's unzipping things, the other thing that's opening. So if the file wasn't unzipped and it's trying to install it, that's an example of deadlock. It stops because it doesn't have what it needs, and it sits there and it says, "I don't have this file," and I'm looking at it saying, "That's a file that you're supposed to. That's a file you're supposed to provide." Anyway, that's deadlock. Anybody know what a race condition is? Let me pop over to the chat. What is the race condition? For those of you that are cybersecurity, it's something important for you to know. Okay, what happens in the race condition in the cybersecurity context is you're aware that something is happening in the code, and you beat it to the punch, so to speak. You notice in the process of doing this, when it's doing this, it has this port open, so you use that port to slip something else in. That's an example of a race condition. And part of evaluating code, if you have to evaluate code for security, is to ensure that those don't happen. How did I do it? I turned it to the programmers, told them to figure it out. Okay, you also have a thing called an event loop. This is what happens with the event loop is you have some code that's running through a do loop there, and it goes and checks these various places to see what's happening with them. Kind of like a waiter or a wait person at a restaurant. You ever seen that you're sitting there eating and they come by and say, "You okay?" Do you need anything that they're going to the net? They just keep on circulating their tables. And what happens is they'll sit there and this person will say, I need a go box. This person says, I'm ready to order. That person needs a drink done. They'll go back and probably do the go box. They'll sit, they'll get drink done. They'll come in. They'll take your order. They'll go ahead and drop it off. Let it be filling, and they'll come back and make sure that you have your appetizer or whatever. That's the idea. Okay, you got an event loop running in the browser's JavaScript, and you also have one running on the server. Okay, the reason this is important to know is it's important to know what's going on in the background. And some of you mentioned this in some of your papers and that about knowing the basics of what's happening behind what you're doing. How the event loop works. Okay, event loop's going here, it's waiting for a message. Meanwhile, back on your browser, you click on something to change color. It says, okay, this goes into a message. It enqueues. It goes onto a message list. Kind of like if you ever seen in a restaurant, you see those little round places where they stick your orders up on and they turn them around. This is back in the old days, before they had all the electronics. I guess now that you can actually order while you're sitting at your table, can't you? Some places. Okay, the idea is it gets taken care of by the event loop. The event loop, it initializes, sends it back, and it changes the color just as they want to. Okay, some additional information on Node.JS. I'd like to encourage you to look through these. I did when I reviewed this because there's a certain amount of understanding how something works you need to do before you. Otherwise, you're just going to Google, copying code, it doesn't work, and then now what, right? More resources. Okay, it says Node.JS REPL. And no, they didn't misspell reptile. REPL is basically a command line interface. When you hit command and you go out on the DOS or you hit terminal, you're in a REPL. You'll sit there, you'll type something, and bash, you'll go do it and come back and say, okay, now what? That's a REPL. So you can use Node and Node in interactive mode, Node.js. What is nice about running a programming language in interactive mode as opposed to running a script? What do you gain by that? When would you want to do that? I can think of 2 examples myself. Maybe you can think of more.
Just for testing stuff out.
Right.
See if it works line
Line by line, like I've done that before. The other thing is you're doing something you don't have to repeat again. Like I know I'm going to have to go into this subdirectory and delete everything out. I'm not going to have to do it again because it's gone. You know. And it used to be a lot of things that you did during what's your file manager, you know, where you have little folders and pictures and all that. You actually had to do it in a command line. So command line is nice. Another thing that's command line is nice is if you want to do something, say in Python, you want to check and make sure that your regular expression does what you think it does. You get yourself a test variable and you sit there and you play with the regex till it works. Okay, this is the application. That's the instruction for it. We will actually take a look to turn the, download that, play with it a bit. You do not have to turn that in. But that's just how it works, and there's your practical exercise. And what happens is this actually would run on the server. So the nice thing, if you have something that runs on the server, then it's just about by definition browser independent. Have any of you had to have worked with HTML or something, and you ran into the problem that there's enough differences in the browsers that you got to figure out how to accommodate them? I guess now you also have to worry about how it shows up on a mobile app. I think some of you mentioned that. Some of your professors says, okay, how's this going to show up on a mobile app? Have you ever tried to pull up a website on your mobile app and it just, on your iPhone and it didn't, or on your smartphone, it just didn't work, right? Okay,